Today, let's take a look at mirrors in games. Developers seem to hate them. In a surprisingly large amount of games, mirrors are either broken or shattered to many pieces even, or what often happens to be the case, they are so dirty you can't make out the reflection. And even when they aren't broken, you can't see anything in them, because, well, they don't work. It's kind of funny, to be honest, that mirrors gameplay-wise are seen as devices. When they are broken, they don't work, and a shattered mirror doesn't reflect light, even though its pieces should. It may be the case that the developers themselves don't think about it, or what's more probable, they assume that we are more likely to accept a mirror that doesn't work if it's shattered. Nevertheless, throughout the years we got accustomed to a general lack of mirrors in games. If, however, there is a mirror in the game we're playing, we are sure to take notice of it. When it comes to first-person games, we notice them instantly, because they give us one of the few opportunities to see the protagonist's face. To understand why mirrors are so problematic to the developers, we need to take a look at the graphics from a wider perspective. It all boils down to how lighting works. From a technical perspective, games are supposed to show how the real world functions, but they are more simulations of how the real world is supposed to look like. And that's the difference. In games, for example, light and physics are defined as being separate categories, but in actuality, however, light is the physics. Let me explain. Electromagnetic waves of various lengths are absorbed or reflected by various surfaces. Light, which is basically beams of singular particles, in that case photons, travels. It refracts and goes through the objects. If you put a certain surface in front of those beams, be it a mirror in that case, they will be reflected. That's how it works in a simplified version. There's nothing stopping the developers from putting mirrors in games in the path of said beams, but light in games, well, it technically doesn't exist.
What?
An ideal futuristic world with limitless processing power would be able to generate single particles in a light beam and simulate light in real time. In that scenario, we would be able to make games that work just like real life, with all its ins and outs. But we can't, and we won't be able for a while. As of now, light in games is only an effect, an attempt to recreate what the human eye sees. You can't put a mirror in front of an electromagnetic wave if there is no wave in the first place. Games don't simulate how beams of light travel, but rather focus on how a particular fragment of the game world would look like if we would simulate certain intensity of light in it. What the game engine calculates is the final effect, not the cause. So, as I've said before, light per se doesn't exist in the game world. Think of it this way. The image from the game is a series of single frames, flat pictures. Each and every one of them consists of pixels, and every pixel has a certain color. And that's it. The entire simulation of the game consists of physics of objects, 3D models, and motion that make up what we will see in each frame. Where will the character stand, how will the surroundings look, and what will be visible on the screen, it's all thanks to pixels changing colors. Light can be treated as just another factor, which the game needs to consider when deciding on the colors of the pixels. Textures have predetermined colors, colors chosen by the developers. Mix those colors with light beams and they'll change a bit. The more light sources the game relies on in the process, the better, because the game world will be more realistic. Let's keep in mind that the game doesn't generate all the objects that would be there otherwise in the real world. We see only what we look at, and not what's behind our back. Thus, the game engine only takes into account what appears in the gamer's line of sight, what the gamer's camera is currently focused on. Other elements can be hidden or compressed at least, until we decide to turn around and look at them directly. The developers have total control over what we see and can fully optimize the experience. But only if there are no mirrors around. Just like I've said before, objects that exist in reality, well, they are there. Even if you don't see them, they aren't going anywhere. Even when they are unseen, they still reflect light. If you look in the mirror, you will see what's behind your back. It's not that simple in games. The first step in generating a frame is defining its shape and then displaying what we're able to see. And so, if you put a mirror in the game, we have to display much more. Every time you get to see anything in the game has to define its place, shape and color, how every element reacts to light. But if a mirror is introduced, each of those things has to be repeated for a new perspective, the perspective of the mirror. So in a way, we're talking about the mirror like a second camera, a second frame if you will. Normally, the game defines the shape of the frames the gamer sees, generates the geometry of the objects, textures, implements additional filters, lighting effects, and corresponding shades. The game also calculates what elements in our line of sight are covered by other, closer to the character, so it doesn't have to generate anything unnecessary. The process of generating a frame is directly linked to what we see, and many of the effects are added later on to a flat frame. The color of the pixel is determined only with the purpose of the particular frame and what it's supposed to look like in a given moment. and when a mirror is in place, the amount of things to generate for a single frame instantly doubles, making it very problematic for the developer. Nevertheless, it is possible to have a working mirror in a game, but most of the time it has to be placed in a small, closed space that is easy to control and a place where there aren't any new variables to account for. A mirror in the game works best in a closed, preferably dark location with as little light sources as possible, and light sources that developers have complete control over. The reflection in the mirror in that case is generated in a lower quality, the draw distance is limited, and so is the aliasing, but that only applies to mirrors in which we see the world as well as the character generated in real time. Games are full of other surfaces that are supposed to look like they're reflective, like glossy objects or bodies of water, but they don't most of the time. Reflections are really impressive visually, and if the developers could, they would implement them everywhere, not only on the most obvious shiny and glossy objects, and at the lowest cost if possible. In that case, the world isn't drawn from a different perspective, like with mirrors. The most popular technique involves generating a multi-layer texture, often in a very low resolution, applied on a texture that's supposed to reflect a flat image that is only generated once, most of the time when the level is being loaded. For every frame where such a surface is visible, all the other things don't have to be redrawn again, and that comes at a price, being that such a surface doesn't reflect anything in motion. Most of the time, developers resort to that sort of reflections. They decide on skipping mirrors, and well, it's hard to blame them. Mirrors aren't so important in the game anyway. That decision also results from the gameplay. When it comes to first-person games, it seems like the best option. If there is a mirror in a game and it works realistically, or as you know by now, it seems as if it works realistically, it's just a curiosity, an interesting detail, nothing more. Popular modern engines actually offer lighting functions that make implementing mirrors easier, but the performance still proves problematic if it's at work. If you by chance encounter a working mirror in the game, you can be sure that developers really wanted to put it in that particular place, and they had to work really hard to make it work too. The video game world on the technical level is full of similar tricks that are supposed to mimic reality, and even the simplest mirror can be a tough challenge. Thanks for watching, I hope you can appreciate mirrors a bit more. See you soon, and keep it here at GamePressure.